Hello, it's Bill Such here. I just want to give you a few suggestions regarding where we're at the end of the fifth week of our course. Basically, in the way that you're approaching the essays, I want to do it en masse. I do a lot of it individually to you as I respond to your essays, but I want to sort of bring things together in a general way now and just make a few comments in terms of what I would call the major things that a good number of you are doing that you can do better to make your essays more coherent and obviously get better grades. The first thing I would say is that a number of you actually you make general statements, and the content of what's asked of you is very specific. So if you're making a statement, for example, about Mark's Gospel, I've just picked that out, and you make a statement that it says in Mark's Gospel that Jesus died for us and so forth, well, you've got to be able to put in some reference to that. You could put in Mark 10:45 and so on, that Jesus died as a ransom and so forth. But you can't just make simple statements that refer to all the Gospels if you're referring to Mark in itself. So be as specific as you can. And that sort of takes me to another element of it, which is the first thing is use a text if you can to back up your point. In other words, you put there Mark 10:45 and so forth, as opposed to just general statements. And do it in such a way that you are making statements about what the essay asks of you, and that you're not falling into a general sort of giving me a devotional talk or devotional comment. In other words, you're talking, let's say, specifically about John's Gospel, and then suddenly you start saying, well, Jesus died for us, and through his death on the cross, our sins are forgiven. And my question is I don't dispute that, but as I've said to you before, I'm interested in what you do to answer the essay question, not what you do to explain who your faith is and what Jesus means to you, unless, of course, that's what actually asked of you. And it's at this point that's not been asked of you. So keep the subject matter in respect to the essay itself, and avoid making it into a sort of a devotional piece where you make general statements that are not specific. Instead of saying, well, Jesus died for us or for me, and he is a ransom for our sins, you could just put that in the sense of Mark states that Jesus died as a ransom for our sins, and this fits in with Mark's Gospel, because the whole of the Gospel is really a passion narrative with a long introduction, because as you know, from Mark 11 through Mark 16, it just covers 5 days of Jesus' life. So in other words, then the focus is upon the death of Jesus. You make that applicable to Mark, and not just as a general statement. The second thing I want to mention to you is the notion of plagiarism, because that is still bugging me in respect to a number of you who are copying ideas verbatim. That means word for word from another source, and then passing it off as if it's your own. I've been fairly gentle with you on that, just basically saying write in your own words. But I've reached a point now at the end of the fifth week that I won't tolerate it if it comes up anymore. And I've told you how to deal with it. The way to deal with it is if you get some ideas in another source, wherever it is, that fits the argument that you're making in the paper, and I'm thinking particularly obviously of the major weekly essay, then what you do is you either state what's said in quote marks, and then put the source, whatever it is, Wikipedia or some particular scholar, or else you rephrase it in your own words. You can do that, and if it's just a statement that's a profound notion, then you would have to cite the source of it. Otherwise, you could just use it to buttress your argument. But don't just copy material from other sources, because as I've told you, I've got the ability to be able to, what Simpson's given me, Simpson University, I could track down a source very, very quickly, and it's not worth it for you. And of course it's basically cheating, because you're attributing yourself to writing something that was actually written by somebody else. So please don't do that. And then in respect to that of your papers, a number of you are just writing a complete paragraph and not splitting it up into a paragraph and treating it as an essay with an introduction and then a body and then a conclusion. Likewise, a number of you make grammatical mistakes that would be easily worked out if you just took that what you've written and just read it out loud to yourself. Now, what I've suggested is that the best thing to do is to take what you've written and print it out and then read it out loud away from the monitor. Then you'll spot the mistakes. But especially as you read it out loud, you will stumble over the grammatical mistakes of what you've put in there. And that will help you, because then you can rectify it. And at the same time, use a spell check. There's no excuse when there's spelling mistakes in there, when you can use a spell check. And even sometimes beginning a sentence, you begin a sentence with a capital letter. This is just basic grammatical stuff that at this point we should be very, very clear about what's expected and what you should do. I've mentioned about splitting paragraphs up so that you have a number of paragraphs in your paper and not just make it one just long sort of statement that you're making. And look at the word count. The word count on the weekly essay is 900 words. If you put in 300 words, then you can't expect to get a good mark from that, because you've only done a third of what's required. So make sure that you actually do fulfill that 900 word account of what's needed in respect to it. And finally, regarding comprehension of, if you have problems where you don't know what the essay is about in the sense of what's been asked of you, although I think it's fairly clear. For example, this week you've been looking at parables, and basically I've just put out there a definition by a contemporary New Testament scholar, and I've said to you, look, how do you interpret this statement? Is this a valid view of the parables? And what you would do, obviously, would be, well, this is Wink's view. You could track him down a bit to find out what his other views are, and I put in a source that we could do that. And then you could go to Elwood and Yarborough and look at what they say about what a parable is, and then compare that with Wink's view. Or you could just go to Wikipedia or some good source, not a general pastoral source from a church, but a scholarly source. Wikipedia is good, and read there the elements of what parables are all about. A basic definition of parables, and you could look at it. So now you've got a comparison between what Wink says and what's the general statement and how parables have been interpreted. Basically, they've been interpreted from the standpoint of seeing them have one major point or two major points, or they've been allegorized, especially from Augustine right through the Middle Ages up to the Reformation, the 16th century, and then they were looked at in a completely different way. And in the last century, they've been looked at in the way that Walter Wink is approaching them. So there you've got three ideas. And even more, then you could go to a parable, any of the parables, for example, Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower, or the parable of the prodigal son in Luke 15, and then see how the author, Luke or Mark, uses the parable. Then you can get an idea of how to interpret the parable. So you can see you can see that there are ways to crack open what's asked of you as you comprehend what the question is that's asked, and that you do it in such a way that you actually keep before you as you think and you write what this question is, and you seek to deal with it, to assess, as in this case, Wink's view of the parables, or whatever it is that asked of you. Don't just write material that's on the subject matter but doesn't address what's asked of you. That's really important, obviously. Okay, thank you.